Hey, how you getting on? Today on Shiny Dome and Knobs with Chrome, I check out this beautiful spaceship, the Hughes Kettner TriAmp Mark III. What is the Hughes Kettner sound? Think of names like Marshall, Boogie, or Diezel. If you're like me and you hear those names, you probably have specific tones in mind. But what's the Hughes Kettner tone? That's what I'm trying to find out today, and the reason why I can't answer that question ad hoc is probably on me for not trying a Hughes Kettner amp earlier. No particular reason, I just never crossed paths with one, which is kind of weird because being an engineer, as I tell you every chance I get, they should be right up my alley because Hughes & Kettner have been at the forefront of guitar amplifier innovation since they started in 1984. And I believe that's largely due to the contributions of a man named Bernd Schneider. As far as I know, Bernd Schneider joined Hughes & Kettner in 1985 and was their chief design engineer. So the creative force behind a lot of the innovations that Hughes & Kettner delivered over the years. Sadly, Mr. Schneider passed away in 2022. And based on what I've read about him, that must have been a devastating blow to Hughes & Kettner. I believe those shoes are very hard to fill. And that might be part of the reason why I haven't had Hughes & Kettner on my radar for the last few years. But in 2025, we got the news that Hughes & Kettner was being acquired by Thomann. And I think that's probably a very good thing for Hughes & Kettner. I believe Thomann will be able to provide Hughes & Kettner with the entrepreneurial firepower this brand deserves because, spoiler alert, this amp's pretty awesome. And that's really what led to this video. This is a collaboration between Hughes & Kettner and myself. This has to be considered a sponsored video. Hughes & Kettner provided the amplifier for this and a few other videos. So to those coming over from the Hughes & Kettner channel, welcome. My name is John. I do deep dives on amplifiers and I talk an awful lot. And this amp is full of features, so buckle your butts. This is going to be a very long video, most likely, but I've put timestamps in the description below to help you navigate. Just skip to the parts you're interested in. I believe Hughes & Kettner are coming out with some cool new stuff. I don't know exactly what they're cooking, but I have reason to believe it's going to be pretty cool because they're retiring this amp. It's the end of the line for the Hughes & Kettner Mark III, so whatever is replacing it is bound to be cool. So that means they're currently making the last ones of these, and if you were thinking about buying one of these new, the time to do so is now, because once they're gone, they'll be gone for good. So what's on the menu for today? First of all, I want to talk about the amplifier a bit. It's features and functions and, ins and outs. Then I want to do a comprehensive playthrough of all the channels and most of its functions. After that, I'm going to pop the chassis out of its head shell. We're going to take a brief look inside of the amplifier, check out how it's laid out, just have a look-see. And finally, I'm going to be doing a shootout with the Hughes & Kettner TriAmp Mark III with some of the amplifiers behind me here using my KHE amp switches. I'm going to be comparing the TriAmp to an EVH 5153, which is completely out of shot on all cameras here. I'm a professional, because that's the modern 5150, the people's high gain tone. Everybody knows what a 5150 sounds like. Then I'm going to be comparing it to my Marshall JVM HJS. That is the Joe Satriani edition, so a more classic rock-sounding amplifier, but still loaded with features. And finally, I wanted to compare the TriAmp to another German boutique amp. I wanted to compare it to one of my Diezels. You guys voted for the VH4, so that's what it's going to be. The original TriAmp, the TriAmp Mark I, came out all the way back in 1995. It was a 6-channel amplifier back then already with 3 channel strips. And what I mean by that is it had 3 full EQs. So 2 channels shared 1 EQ each. And you're probably wondering why call it a TriAmp then if it had 6 channels back then. That is because 2 channels belong to one amplifier. In addition to switching the preamp, the amp would also switch the negative feedback circuit of the power amp. So effectively, you'd get a power amp that behaved differently as well, thus making it a TriAmp. And 6 channels is a lot by today's standards. In 1995, that was insane. The market looked like this. There was the PV50, 152 at that stage, I believe already. 2-channel rectifiers. Laney had the VH100R. Marshall was on JCM 900s. Engel had the Savage, their first version. And Diezel had the VH4, but still that's 4 channels compared to 6 channels. In 2002, Hughes Kettner launched the TriAmp Mark II, which introduced the blue glowing front. And in 2015, they came out with the TriAmp Mark III and dialed everything up to 11, because now we have 6 full EQs, 1 EQ per channel. And I can't think of a single amplifier that has 6 full EQs. Even the Randall 667 or 14 Meathead has 6 channels, but they share an EQ. So look at the amount of knobs here. Also, they added 2 more power tubes. Now you have 2 EL34s and 6 6L6s in here stock, and you can switch the pairs on and off individually. You can put in pretty much all pairs of octal tubes in there. There's an auto biasing circuit I'm going to get into later. It's pretty much set and forget. And you can configure these pairs however you want. The 2 outer ones on, all of them on, middle and left, middle and right, or just individual pairs. I think that's pretty cool. In general, this amplifier has 15 tubes in it, all tube amp Dr. tubes, by the way. The only place I've seen more glass is my old man's whiskey cabinet. So as I've mentioned probably 17 times already, the TriAmp Mark III is a 6-channel amplifier, and it has a stomp boost on board that is switchable via this button on the front or via MIDI foot switch, which sort of replaces a tube screamer in front of the amp. But the circuit is slightly different for each channel of the amplifier. So probably on the clean channels, it'll be more like a treble boost. On the high gain channels, maybe more like a tube screamer. It's voiced differently for every channel of the amplifier. Apart from that, we have buttons on the front panel for the onboard noise gate that can be set between hard and soft. There's a dial on the back. I'll show you some fancy B-roll right now. Dual breakpoint means it looks at the signal coming in at the input and the signal coming out of the preamp, and it calculates the ideal threshold that way. We have a switchable effects loop, which can be set between series and parallel operation. We can switch between plus 4 dB and minus 10 dB, so it works with rack gear and pedals. And I believe we can set the return level as well. On the back panel, we have Hughes Kettner's famed speaker emulation, the Redbox AE. We have the dial for the noise gate, the effects loop dials, as I just mentioned. We have a power amp insert, so you can connect a preamp directly there. And we have a preamp out, so you could slave the preamp into a different power amp for wet rigs, for example. We also have a dial that lets us control the illumination of the front panel. We can really light it up like a Christmas tree, or if blue LEDs aren't for you, you can turn it off pretty much entirely. I like it somewhere in the middle. One of my favorite features of the TriAmp Mark III is the tube safety circuit. That is a circuit that automatically biases the power amps for one, and it also monitors their functional state. So if one of the power amps is failing, you'll be able to tell from the LEDs there. And just a few more things before we get to the playthrough finally. The scope of delivery with this amp is quite impressive. For one thing, we get this envelope with important information where the manual is listed. And again, I'm mentioning I'm an engineer. I have to do with documentation fairly regularly. I have to read it. I have to write it. And as far as documentation goes, this is good documentation. Everything in here is explained comprehensively, is coherent, is well laid out. Good documentation. Apart from that, you get a pair of pajamas for your amp as well. So you get this nice dust cover you can pop on top of this amplifier, as well as the IEC cord, of course. You also get included this Hughes Kettner FSM 432 Mark II MIDI foot switch, which I think is pretty cool because if you look at Hughes Kettner's domestic competition, that's something you won't find included with the amp. The big MIDI foot switches are usually optional extras you have to pay for. This thing is pretty cool because it has different modes. The stomp box mode, where you can use these buttons just to switch through the individual channels, as well as turn the stomp boost on and off. There's also a preset mode where you can just program the amp. As you see on this preset 1, I have channel 2B with just the EL34s on. On channel 2, or on button 2, I have the same channel with just the middle pair on, and so forth. I'm going to use that later to show you the effect of the different power amp configurations. It was very easy to program. There's also a direct mode for more complex switching situations. Those go way over my head though, so we're not going to go into those. And finally, what I've never seen before, this amp comes with a polishing kit for the plexiglass front. And I haven't had this amp for a while, but I can already see smudges from my dirty midsole. So that's probably what this is for, to keep your amp nice and clean. All right, time for the playthrough. I'll be using this Henry's in drop D for the most time. Occasionally, I might switch to my PRSCE and drop C sharp, and the Balaguer Espada in drop A for a few select riffs. I've got the TriAmp Mark III on my Mesa oversized cab because I don't have a Hughes Kettner cab yet. Likewise, I'm keeping it very simple. I just have an SM57 on the V30 with the dust cap meets the cone. Now, usually I'd explore the amp channel by channel, but before I do that, I just want to sample all 6 channels for you guys really quickly, just so you get a brief impression. I've got all EQs roughly on noon. Gain is on noon on every channel. The only thing I've adjusted is the masters, and that's the only thing that confuses me here. We have 6 masters and 1 volume. Shouldn't it be the other way around? That's a little bit of a misnomer to me. Anyway, so boost is off, clean channel. 1B. 2A. 2B. And that's the money channel, but we'll get into that later. 3A. 3B. So as you're able to tell, the channels kind of stack on top of each other gain-wise. Gain increases with each channel, but they also shift pretty drastically in tone, especially on amp 3, so channel 3A and channel 3B. 3B in particular is ridiculously thick, but we're going to dial them once we get there. I want to start with channel 1A, of course. Which is a very clean channel with the gain on noon. I'm going to switch to single coil. Down, wind up a bit. Very, very brilliant, nice sounding clean channel, very Fender-esque. Let's max the gain to dial the master back a bit. With a humbucker, at least, we can get into slight overdriven territory. I want to add these boost stomp boost. Boost stomp stomp boost. So that gives it a nice bit of grit, but it's a little different than adding, say, a tube screamer. I'm going to add in my Lichtlamp King in yellow, for example, which is kind of like a tube screamer-esque boost. I've got the gain on 0, but the level pretty high. I'm going to toggle it on and off and then toggle the stomp boost on and off so you can really hear the difference between them. So the effect of the stomp boost inside of the amp is much more subtle. It's slightly more nuanced. Might be something like a treble booster and not like a tube screamer boost to it. But if we dial the gain down a bit and put this boost stomp in, stomp boost, I'm going to struggle with that all the way through the video. So 1A is a really nice clean channel. You can pretty much get away with any clean you want. You can have it crystal clean, you can have it slightly dirty. That should be it. Let's move on to 1B, which is probably a slightly more British-like clean channel. Notice it sounds a little thicker and it's immediately a little more gritty than the channel 1A. So 1A is probably more like a Fender-esque clean channel, and 1B probably like a slightly dirty Marshall clean. Dial down the gain. But we can coax a very nice clean tone out of this channel too. And that's with the humbucker. If we switch to the single coil, it gets even cleaner. But I want to up the gain a bit. Let's see how crunchy this one can get. And it just occurred to me that you probably can't see the gain settings very well. The EQ is still pretty much at noon on this channel, but the gain is at 2:30, almost 3 o'clock-ish. Sounds like this. See how much gain we can get out of this. With the gain maxed, it gets a lot thicker. I would dial up the treble and the mids a bit to compensate for that. Let's double boost this, see how much gain we can get out of this. Well, that's a lot of fun. You can get a good punk rock tone out of this channel with the gain on max, with the stomp boost on, and a boost pedal in front of the amp. So it takes double boosting quite well, and that's an impressive range of tones we can get out of amp 1 of the Hughes Kettner TriAmp Mark III. One thing that I just remembered, and I forgot to mention, especially on channel 1A, it's a very dynamic channel. Very responsive. Let's move on to channel 2A. I immediately noticed that there's overlap gain-wise between channel 1B and channel 2A. Quite a healthy amount of overlap, in fact. This is a lower gain tone than the one we ended up with on channel 1B. There's also an EQ difference. Channel 2A sounds much thinner in this configuration with this gain setting than 1B did. In fact, it reminds me a bit of a JCM 800 type or Plexi type amplifier that doesn't have the bejesus cranked out of it. The bass a bit, add some mids, and pull the treble back a little bit. Probably good for some AC/DC tones. Let's up the gain a bit. And with the gain comes the thickness. There might be an internal bright cap in there that we can't switch that is less effective with higher gain. So I'm going to actually up the treble a bit again. And we're in similar gain ranges that we were in before, just without a stomp boost. If we add the stomp boost, so let's move over to channel 2B. And it seems like with the gain in the middle, it has about the same level of gain as 2A on Mac. I think 2B has a little more substance. And I'm not going to bother with dialing the gain lower on this channel. I'm going to increase it a bit. Now we're getting there. And this is starting to become my comfort zone. And John Brown actually gave me the tip. Not myself, John Brown from Monuments. I met him at Guitar Summit, although I sometimes fear I have a Tyler Durden situation on hand because he's got a full head of hair and he actually knows how to play guitar. Now, John recommended channel 2B with the gain on max and with the boost engaged. With the gain on max, it sounds like this. Down the stomp boost. I have to agree with him. In preparing for this video, this is where I spend the most time. In fact, I can double boost this channel as well. I have to pay attention not to get too carried away because this channel is a lot of fun. Gain on max, double boosted. It has great attack, great clarity, and just an overall really fun response. That is my favorite setting on this amp. But let's move on to channel 3A. And in comparison, 3A seems a lot thicker and more sluggish. Kind of reminds me a bit of an unboosted dual rectifier. I dial the bass back a bit. Up the treble. And the mid. Now we end up with a voicing more similar to that of channel 2B, but with a little more heft and with the gain only on half. Let's have the stomp move. In fact, I'm going to switch to my PLS because these tones are considerably more modern sounding. Up the gain a bit. Should we double boost this? I think so. That's a bit too aggressive. I'm going to turn the stomp boost a bit. Got a sludgy tone. Let's up the bass and the mid some more. I get confused because the orientation of the EQ isn't bass, middle, treble as I'm used to. It's treble, middle, bass. So I want to dial down the treble a bit and up the bass instead. Stomp boost. It's disgusting. I'm gonna set it back to my preferred setting here. Wrong button. So you can set these channels to build up very nicely on top of each other. You can have a really nice clean tone, slightly dirty tone, cool crunch tone, pretty sick high gain tone, even sicker high gain tone. And now we're getting to channel 3B. And as you're able to hear, hopefully, this channel sounds ridiculously thick. There's just so much low end in it. imagine this channel might have been, the concept behind it might have been for leads. So I'm going to up the treble and the middle and dial back the bass a bit. Well, I suppose you could get very doomy tones out of this as well. What's the bass here? I can even see I've got Voxengo Span Plus open to show you what the EQ does in a later part of the video. I can see how spiked the bass is. You gotta watch out for the speakers. So to get my preferred style of high gain tone out of this channel, because I don't know if you can see that so well on the camera, treble is almost maxed. It's at, what would that be, 5 o'clock. Mid almost maxed as well, and bass is pretty low. It's at about 9 o'clock. Gain on this is pretty high with the stomp boost on. Whoops! And even with that setting, it still sounds ridiculously thick. Let's add a King and Yellow instead of the Stomp Box boost. Still ridiculously thin. Let's dial the bass out completely. So bass is out completely, mids and treble are almost max, and that is, yeah, that's how I would play a rhythm tone on that channel. I'm turning off the King and Yellow, adding the stomp boost back in. But honestly, I don't think this channel needs to be set like that, because I can get the tone I want, my high gain rhythm tone I want, out of 2 other channels as well. I can get it out of 3A or 2B. I don't really need 3B for that, so I would use 3B for something entirely different. Maybe really thick, creamy leads, if that was something I play or were capable of playing. Or just something really doomy and drony. Now, before I move on to the EQ and then we take a look inside of the amp, I want to see how well it handles drop A, so I'm getting my Bollinger guitar. That's ridiculous, but I want to focus on channel 3A and 2B. So channel 3A handles drop A, so lower tunings with absolute grace. In fact, the channels seem to sound a little brighter to me than it did before with the PRS, which kind of helps the thickness of the strings I use for low gain tunings to not be overwhelming. Added some nice clarity. Let's see how channel 2B reacts to the baritone. It's double boosted. Oh, that gets a bit noisy. I'm going to try. Handles Logan. I've got a bad cable on my tuner, it seems. So it handles low gain tones perfectly fine. Clarity is there. Thump is there. I'm impressed. Now, one thing I won't be demonstrating in this video is the onboard gate. You can see I have it on now and then to mute the amp noise while I'm speaking, and you could hear it cut in and out there just a few minutes ago. The gate is perfectly fine. It's not the best gate I've ever tried, but it's perfectly usable. I wouldn't really see the necessity to use an external gate with this. So yeah, that's about all I'm going to say about the gate. Now, before I pop the amp out of its head shell, what I want to do is I want to loop a riff through my looper pedal and film some twisting of the EQ while showing you the frequency responses on screen. And I'm having a hard time choosing which EQ to use for this. I don't want to bore you guys with 6 different EQs, so I'm going for the middle ground. I'm going for my money channel 2B, gain max, stomp boost on. So if you ask me, that's a very powerful EQ, especially the treble and the presence knob. When they're max, they can get pretty aggressive. Now, of course, I've forgotten something. I wanted to show you guys the different power amp selections here. And for that, I've set the MIDI board to preset mode, and I've programmed some presets for channel 2B. And you can see I can toggle between the individual pairs here. That one should be pairs, well, that is pair 1 and 2, that's EL34s. The other two are 6L6s. And if we toggle between the two 6L6s, I don't hear much of a difference in the room. In fact, I don't hear any difference in the room. But if I toggle between one of the 6L6s and the EL34s, so there might be some merit to when people say that EL34s are more MIDI. Of course, that might be the circuit. I don't know. There might be, it might have to do with the bias. But it's interesting that you can really blend these different power amp nodes to the way you need them. We add in more. That's 4 6L6s. There's 2 EL34. And the amp remembers what you've set them for. For example, for channel 1A, I could use just the 6L6s. 1B, I might want 1 EL34 and 1 6L6. And if you see, if I switch back to 1A, it remembers that I just want 4 6L6s there. For example, on this channel, maybe I just want EL34s. On 2B, I want all of them. And on 3B, again, I only want EL34s. And you can see, if I switch back, the amp remembers each configuration, which brings me to the floorboard. In preset mode, couldn't be simpler. Just set whatever you want to have switched then. I want effects loop, gate on, 3B, channel boost off. That's what I want on one of my buttons on a foot switch. I then just press MIDI learn, and I'm going to put that on the fourth button. And if I switch to something, I switch to the fourth button, and back to where I was. Could not be simpler. So that really should be it. I'm going to switch off the amp, and then I'm going to pull out the chassis. Then I'm going to pull the head shell. No, I'm going to pull the chassis out of the head shell. Time to look inside the amp, which means I need to get the chassis out of the head shell, which could be a little challenging. I don't quite know how things are fastened. The plexiglass front plate, the face plate, seems to be mounted to the chassis using these countersunk hex bolts here, but it's also fastened with these 2 screws on the top. There's 8 screws on the bottom. I'm not sure if they hold the chassis and the faceplate. So I'm just gonna have to figure it out. I want to leave the plexiglass front in. So I'm just gonna remove these screws, and then I'll turn around the back because there's something I want to show you there. And here's what I wanted to show you guys. Take a look at the mechanism that holds the power tubes in place. They're held in place by metal springs that are mounted to the ventilation grill on the top of the head shell. And I've never seen anything like this. Usually you'll find kind of clamps here on the side mounted to the tube sockets that hold the base of the tube in place. Or sometimes you'll find kind of spring-loaded caps that you pull over the tubes that hold them in place. There's usually an O-ring at the top plate that holds the tubes. But I've never seen this. But this is a German amp. This was made by German engineers, and that tells me this isn't just for aesthetics. There has to be a functional purpose for this, because this is bespoke. This isn't cheap. It'd probably be cheaper just to buy the regular clamps from Tube Amp Doctor or the other holding mechanism. I think these springs sort of act like a heatsink, so that the heat generated by the tubes isn't just pulled out of the amplifier through convection, but also through conduction. I think the grill on top here is probably made of aluminium or something like that, so something that conducts heat pretty well. That way the thermal regulation of the amp is improved, because we have 6 power tubes in here. These will generate a lot of heat, and they're pretty close to each other. And I believe you can use pretty much any octal-based power tube in here, so that includes the big ones, the 6550s and the KD88s. And looking at this, they'll be almost touching. And for example, Marshall JVMs, one mod that you could do is put KD88s in them, but they're spaced pretty close together. The Marshall Kerry King, for example, that comes stock with KD88s, I believe has wider spacing between the power tubes for that reason, because of the heat. So I think to ensure that the amp remains thermally regulated, these springs here pull some of the heat out of the chassis. Okay, slight change of plan. I'm taking it out with the plexiglass faceplate after all, because there's a wire coming out of the chassis that is connected to the plexiglass front for the LED illumination, and it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't look like you can disconnect that on the plexiglass side. So I'm suspecting, or I'm expecting, quite a few SMD components, because with an adjustable boost for everything, the power amp switching, as well as the auto biasing circuit, I'm having a hard time imagining how you could fit all that in there with regular through-hole components. Let's take a peek. Oh, I was wrong. Completely wrong. Righto, I've turned the amp around on its faceplate. That's what it's resting on right now, because the other way around it would have been resting on its tubes. And as I said, I expected to see a lot of surface mount components, but no. Not really. This is actually very conventional. Through-hole components, resistors, capacitors, pretty much what we see in other amps as well. And as you can see, it's pretty loaded. There's one main PCB here with the top row of pots on it, for example, and there's a few auxiliary boards that are connected using these Molex connectors that seem fairly decent as well. They're not the cheap, flimsy Molex connectors that will break. These look pretty sturdy and reliable. There's one board up here that houses the other row of pots, which would be the lower channels, so the B channels. There's an output board, that's what I'd call it here, with a few auxiliary boards. I believe this auxiliary board houses the boost circuit. We have these boards here that are probably for the ambience emulated DI output, so the Redbox AE. The transformers are labeled. Everything is labeled in general, so solder connections look pretty good as well. The switches are mounted with decent connections. There's additional fuses here. These are the filter capacitors. In general, I'd assess this amp as fairly easy to work on. A qualified tech could fix an issue on this pretty easily. And based on the documentation for the end user, I'd imagine that Hughes and Kettner have pretty decent service manuals for techs as well. So overall, I'm very pleasantly surprised. This looks very cool indeed. Nice layout. Yeah, TOJB approved. Let's put this back in the head shell, move over to the shootout. Welcome to the shootout section of the video, where I take the amp I demo and I compare it to some reference amps to help you put the tones of the amp in context and help you assess if the amp I'm demoing is for you. And if you've skipped to this section, I'm comparing the TriAmp Mark III to the EVH5153, the Marshall JVM 410HJS, the Joe Satriani version of the amp, and my Diezel VH4. And we're starting the shootout with the EVH5153. I think that's the people's high gain tone. Everybody knows what a 5150 sounds like, and everybody knows if they like a 5150 or not. I'm going to be comparing the blue channel of the EVH and the red channel of the EVH to some selected channels on the TriAmp Mark III. All amps in this shootout are set the way I like them, and I'm going to see how close we can get with the TriAmp, or how this TriAmp sounds in comparison. The blue channel of the EVH sounds like this. And I've got the feeling that might correspond to channel 2B on the TriAmp, which sounds like this. That's very similar in voicing. I think the TriAmp might have a bit more bass and mids, but the overall gain levels and the tones are very close. There are some slight differences, and I don't think it's worth tweaking them out. Both have useful EQs. You could get them closer. Before I move on to the red channel, I just want to add a boost. I'm kicking in the Lick Audio King in Yellow. Let me just turn on the gate for the moment. Because boosted blue channel on the EVH is my favorite sound on that amp. The red channel is can be a bit over the top, but boosted blue is where it's at. The EVH seems to have a little more give, but maybe if we make them both 50 watts with 6L6. I think the EVH has a bit more resonance. Let's add some more 6L6s. So they have some minor EQ differences. The feel is a little different. I think the EVH feels a little more, just ever so slightly more squishy and bouncy. And of course, the blue channel would have a little more gain to give. This 2B channel is maxed out gain-wise, but of course, we still have channel 3A, which I got to sound pretty similar in voicing in the main playthrough. So if we wanted more gain, we could get it from channel 3A. And I think that's what I want to do next, because I want to move on to the red channel of the EVH, which is pretty lethal usually. I think the TriAmp is a little more bouncy, so I'm going to dial the resonance out a bit. And they're pretty damn close. They're not identical, and it's not the point of the shootout to make them sound identical, but to put the tones from the amplifier in context. And the TriAmp can do EVH 5150 sounds pretty convincingly, if you ask me. Should I add a boost? Yeah, why not? Just for a few chugs. The higher strings, the EVH has the tiniest bit of bounce to it. I don't know how to explain it, but it almost feels like when you're chugging the strings, there's a bit of a cushion, there's a bit of pushback. The TriAmp has that too, but not as much. Now the question is, could you dial the TriAmp to have more response like that by dialing up the presence, not the presence, the resonance again, possibly, but you really have to shoot them out close like this to even notice that. Really close sounding and very close in feel as well, if you ask me. And I think that should do it for the EVH. I want to move on to the Joe Satriani Marshall amp. A few words before we start on this. The Satriani JVM is not a metal amp, in my opinion. It doesn't have that aggressive bite that the regular JVM has. It's more of a rock amp. It's quite smooth up top. Like the two OD channels, OD2 and OD1, they're actually identical. You can switch in a mid shift here, which changes the voicing slightly, but otherwise, no, not otherwise, the channels are identical. So the highest we can go is OD red. I've got it on orange now. It sounds like this. That's with the boost on. In fact, I'm going to turn that off again. If I put it in red, which is the highest, and that is a very high gain rock tone. It doesn't have that metal aggression. It's not super tight. So for this amp, I really want to focus more on, you know, the Marshall rock tones. So I'm going to be doing Crunch Orange on this first, which sounds like this. And I want to compare that to, I think, channel 2A on the TriAmp. I'm going to mix EL34s and 6L6 for this one. So the TriAmp is a lot brighter and more aggressive sounding. So I'm going to dial the treble back a bit and maybe reduce the presence a bit, see if we can get a bit closer. Does some more mids in. Different high-end responses, neither is better or worse, they're just a little bit different. I actually prefer the TriAmp a bit, but I like a little more brighter and aggressive sounds. I want to move on to the OD channel of the JVM, OD Orange to be precise, and that sounds like this. And I want to compare that again to channel 2B on the play. That's closer than I expected, to be honest. The JVM is louder. Volume matching is the most difficult part of these shootouts because perception is so affected by volume. What's that called? Fletcher-Munson curve or something? But in the room and playing them pretty close. Let's add a boost for good measure. going to turn off the boost again. The TriAmp has ever slightly more attack, but again, I kind of prefer that. So I think that should do it for the JVM. Let's move over to possibly the most interesting part of the shootout, the Diezel VH4, because the VH4 is a very unique sounding amp. I would have chosen the Habit, to be honest, because that also has 6 power tubes like the TriAmp, but I might have to do a follow-up shootout with some more amps. The VH4 sounds like this. Absolutely unique sounding amp, squishy mids, very unique response. I'm not sure which channels to use for the comparison because I'm honestly just winging this part. Maybe 2B? So maybe channel 3A with lower gain settings is the better candidate for the Diezel VH4 shootout because gain-wise, even though they're close with channel 2B, I think with the gain of 2B, which is at about 1 o'clock, between 1 and 2 o'clock, it loses some of that fundamental heft. You could hear it on the higher strings. So I'm going to try to dial 3A a little closer to that. It comes pretty close. Diezel's, especially the VH4, have those smacking mids. I don't know how to describe them. It's some people call them squishy mids. There's something about the mid voicing that is very unique to Diezel's, and the VH4 is probably the most pronounced amp with that characteristic in Diezel's lineup. But when it comes to overall tonality, I think, and gain levels, I think the TriAmp can hang. Let's add a boost. So I've talked way too much throughout this shootout. Anyway, I'm going to let you guys be the judge. They don't sound identical, of course not. The Diezel is a very unique sounding amp. Probably one of the VH4 is probably one of the most unique sounding. No, that doesn't make sense. Either something is unique or not, but maybe one of the most unusual sounding and feeling amps in my collection. Anyway, I think the TriAmp Mark III gets pretty close, tone-wise. Feel-wise, they're a little different, as I went on in far too much detail again, even though I said I'd already talked too much. But yeah, you guys be the judge. I think that should do it for the shootout. All right, it's time to conclude what is probably the longest amp demo video I've ever done. But what can I say? The TriAmp Mark III is just loaded with features. The hilarious part is I didn't even demo them all, like the Redbox AE. I think I might have to do a follow-up video with the extra features and some more shootouts. I'm going to do some more shootouts. I think a shootout versus the Habit is warranted, or maybe the Savage 120 Mark II, or even the Prometheus. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But I want to circle back to the beginning of the video where I asked, what is the Hughes & Kettner sound? And after playing this extensively and going through this very long demo, hysterically, I still can't tell you. But I think that's by design. Everything on this amp feels very deliberate. I mean, this came out in 2015. It's the third iteration. The first one came out 20 years before that. And you can really feel how refined and thought out this amp is. It's conceptually super sound. Every channel is usable. Every feature is usable. Nothing feels like a compromise. Everything feels like it's precisely the way it's supposed to be. And in the shootout, I did something that I usually don't do. I tweaked the settings on the amp to try to get them a little closer than they would have been from the get-go. I don't usually do that because the idea is to create a tonal reference first and foremost. However, while I was learning this amp and playing with it, I realized how flawed my thinking is when it comes to those signature sounds of the amplifiers. Yes, Marshall's, Diezel's, PV5150s and Boogies, they have signature sounds, but that's not always a good thing. Diezel's for me, for example, I love them now, but they were an acquired taste for me. I really had to figure them out first. Same with Marshall. The first time I tried a Marshall, I didn't really like them that much. I love them now, but it took me a while, and a lot of my friends still don't like Marshalls. And in fact, a lot of my friends don't like Diezel's at all. Boogies as well. I've heard so many stories of people having to learn how to dial and do a rectifier first. I'd only tried one last year for the first time, so I really knew what to expect, so I got on with that one pretty well from the get-go. 5150s, some people hate the way the PV5150 sounds, others love it. The TriAmp has 6 different channels, 3 different amps in one, that are all different in feel and tone, but they're kind of neutral. And I think, again, that's deliberate. That's by design, because I believe the designers or designer of this amp didn't want to impart a voicing onto the amplifier that you can't get rid of, because that can be in your way. Instead, I believe this amp was designed to be a clear canvas with all the tools on board, all the paints and brushes you need to paint your own picture with it. And that's pretty much the statement I wanted to make on the tonal philosophy of the Hughes & Kettner TriAmp Mark III, or at least my interpretation of the tonal philosophy. It just feels like very deliberately engineered, and it's a fantastic amp, at least in my opinion. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better value for money package right now, definitely in the boutique market. Just with the foot switch alone, all the features, it's 1,008 euros, 1,800 euros new, I think, as of me filming this video. If you want one, you can get one using my affiliate link down below. I always say buy used if you can, but if you have to buy new, it helps an awful lot if you use my affiliate links. That gives me a little kickback at no extra cost of your own. But if you think, no, you capitalist pig, you have enough amps, you probably have enough money, and you look like somebody who chews loudly, you're fair to just go to Thoman's website and order it there without using my affiliate link. And that's without risk. Thomann have a great return policy. You can get one of these, try it out. And if you don't like it, which I doubt, you can send it back. Really easy. So, what did you think? What was your favorite feature on this amp? What's your favorite channel? How do you like the tones? Let me know in the comments down below. That's about all I've got. Thank you so very much for watching this probably very long video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.